Okay, so completing the square, it's a new method of solving. Let's look at the first example. X squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 25. In the past, how would I have solved this one? Yep, subtract 25 from both sides, which would give me x squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0. And then what would I do to solve that one? Diamond. So what two numbers multiply to negative 9 and add up to negative 8? 9 and 1. One of them has to be negative, though. Which one?
9.
The 9. Good. So this factors to x minus 9 times x plus 1 equals 0. And then how would I solve that one?
You add 9 and subtract 1.
We set both equal to 0. So I get x equals 9 and x equals negative 1. Not too bad, right? Okay, that should be reviewed from the previous unit. Let's look at another problem. X squared minus 18x, there's a typo on here, so minus 18x plus 81 equals 5. Okay, how would I solve this one? Subtract 5. So that gives me x squared minus 18x plus 76 equals 0. And then we can do diamond method on this one also. What two numbers multiply to 76 and add up to negative 18? Can you think of any?
Nope.
19 and what?
12 and 6.
No. 12 and 6?
Nope.
No. Can you think of any?
14 and 4. I won't forget. Yeah. More? Sorry.
19 and 4 do multiply to 76, but do they add up to 18?
9, 10, 14. 8.
There's nothing. Okay, there is no before we would have said this is not factorable and we would be done, right?
Can we say that? What?
In the previous unit, oh my goodness, I can't even spell factorable. Okay, so before we would have said not factorable and then we were done. Not anymore. We're learning a new method today called completing the square.
I forgot about that.
So, because it's not factorable, just because it's not factorable doesn't mean there's not an answer. Okay, previously we would have said not factorable and then we would have stopped. Now we have a new method on finding the answer when you can't factor the expression. Okay? Eventually. So, first thing we want to do is figure out what is a perfect square trinomial. So, a perfect square trinomial example would be x squared plus 18x plus 81. Now, when you factor this using the diamond, two numbers that multiply to 81 and add up to 18 were 9 and 9. So this would be x plus 9 times x plus 9, or x plus 9 squared. Okay, that's why this is called a perfect square trinomial, because when we factor it, it's a perfect square, x plus 9 squared. Okay, so that's considered a perfect square trinomial.
Wait.
Is when we look at x plus 9 squared, and then look at these two terms, 81 and 18. What do you notice about those two terms in relation to 9? Look at 81 and 18. 81 is 9 times 9, and 18 is 9 plus 9, or 9 times 2. A perfect square trinomial will always be this way. This number squared will be the last term, and this number multiplied by 2 will be the middle term, always. Okay, so let's try another one. If I give you x squared minus 8x plus 16, is this a perfect squared trinomial? Well, it's a perfect squared trinomial. It would be x plus 4?
No, minus 4.
Oh, minus 4, yeah, square.
Why minus 4?
Because it's a negative 8.
Because it's a negative 8.
Negative times negative.
A negative times negative is a positive. This term will always be positive. Okay? The last term in a perfect square trinomial will always be positive because anytime you square a number, the answer always comes out as positive. Okay? So this is the sign that we are paying attention to in the middle. Not too bad? Okay, so what you're going to be given in your homework, and in order to do completing the square, is we're going to be given an expression in standard form. Standard form is x squared plus bx plus c. B and c are going to be numbers. But at first we're going to be finding the value of c that makes it a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so you're going to be given x squared plus some number x plus c, and we need to put in a number for c that makes it a perfect square trinomial. So how do we do that? First we're going to take half of b, so b divided by 2.
Wait, so it's always going to be even number? Or we have to work the fraction?
Step 2, you are going to square that number so to get c. So c is equal to b over 2 squared. That's going to be something we need to know. And as a note, it always comes out to be positive. So once we find that c, we're going to plug it back into the trinomial, and then we're going to write it out as a factored, in factored form. So x plus b over 2 squared. So we're going to plug c back in, and then we're also going to factor it. Okay, so this is about 2/3 of your homework for the weekend. You're going to be given a partial trinomial with a c in there instead of an actual number. And your instructions are to find the c that makes a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so the instructions that you just wrote in your notes, that's what we're going to be doing to find this term. So our instructions were to use the formula c equals b over 2 squared. So we're going to plug in b, which is positive 16, and square it. So that's going to give me 8 squared, which is 64. So c is 64. So when I plug that back in, it's going to give me x squared plus 16x plus 64. And now this is a perfect square trinomial. How would I factor that? X plus 8 squared. And that's all they want us to do.
How do we use this in real life? I'm really simple. Like, why should people make up these equations?
Okay.
You don't even know.
Step
Let's be honest,
2.
You don't know.
Okay. Next one. X squared minus 2x plus c. Same idea. We just want to plug in or find the c that makes us a perfect square trinomial. Okay. So we're going to take b, which in this case is negative 2, divide it by 2, and square it. So that's going to give me negative 1 squared, which gives me a c of positive 1. Will c always be positive? Yes, it will. So when we plug it in, that's going to give me x squared minus 2x plus 1. So how would that factor?
1, or x.
Negative 1 and negative 1, so x minus 1 squared. Good. What do you guys notice about the number that gets plugged into the binomial, positive 8 and negative 1? Did anybody notice anything? Look at our work. And this part?
They're in the...
Yeah, it's the number that goes inside the binomial is the number that we get before we square the whole thing, always. So it's going to go straight from here into the binomial, okay? What about if we have a b that's not an even number? So, second one, x squared equals negative 15x plus c.
I wasn't ready for that one, to be honest.
So c equals b over 2 squared, so that's negative 15 over 2 squared.
That was so fun.
Okay, negative 15 squared gives me 225. We want to leave them as fractions. Don't try making them decimals. All over 4. So that's going to be x squared minus 15x plus 225 over 4. Well, they want us to write our answer of factors. So x plus, or x minus 15 over 2 squared. Okay, that's all you have to do. Okay, so this is actually not considered what completing the square is. This is just making a perfect square trinomial. However, it is a major part of completing the square. So, the steps to completing the square. So, this is a solving method. What we want to do is you're going to be given an equation that you cannot use, if you can't use the diamond method on it, you're going to be used completing the square now. Okay, so you're going to get all the x's on one side, and you're going to want to get the constant on the other side. So the constant is what's keeping us from being a perfect square trinomial. So we move it to the other side of the equal sign. So then we're going to make the whole thing a perfect square trinomial by finding c and adding it to both sides. Why would I add c to both sides?
You do one side, you do the other.
Exactly. Whatever I do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we have to keep them balanced. Good. Okay, so we're going to have a perfect square trinomial now, which means we can take the square root of both sides. And remember, when you take the square root, your answer needs to be plus or minus. So make sure you don't forget that. And then we're going to be able to just solve for x. Okay, so now example 3, you actually can solve using the diamond method. I want to use completing the square to show you that you will get the same answer. So if we were to use the diamond method on this one, what two numbers multiply to negative 16 and add up to 6x? X plus 8 and x minus 2. And that would give me an answer of negative 8 and positive 2, right? Let's do completing the square to see if we get the same answer. Okay, so typically if you see a problem like this, you can go straight ahead and use diamond method. That's okay. I want to show you completing the square just so you have an example of how to do it, and then we'll do a couple more examples that are not able to use the diamond method. So, first step says we need to get the constant on the other side. So that means I need to add 16 to both sides, because that negative 16 is what is keeping me from being a perfect square trinomial. So that's going to give me x squared plus 6x equals 16. And because I'm trying to find the number that makes it a perfect square trinomial, I usually do a plus blank inside each of them so that I remember that I have to fill in those blanks. Okay, so how do I fill in the blanks? I need to find c, which is what we just did in the previous 3 examples. How do I find c, guys? Do you remember? b over 2 squared. Okay, so that's going to be 6 over 2 squared, which is 3 squared, which gives me 9. So 9 goes in each of those blanks. Okay, we're almost done. How does this guy factor? It's now a perfect square trinomial, so it gives me x plus 3 squared equals 25. So I factored my perfect square trinomial. And now this looks like a lot of what we did on the homework last night. If I have x plus 3 squared, I can take the square root of both sides. That gives me x plus 3 equals plus or minus 5. And then subtract 3 from both sides. So how many answers am I actually going to have? 2. I have negative 3 plus 5, which gives me x equals 2. And negative 3 minus 5, which gives me negative 8. So we got the same answers. Like I said, if you can use diamond method, use the diamond method. It's obviously faster, right? Completing the square is the method that we are going to use when you cannot factor using diamond method. Okay? So this first example was just to show you the steps and how to do it. Okay? So if you can use diamond method, please do. So let's look at an example where I can't use the diamond method. Okay, so example 4. So an example of when we can't use diamond method. X squared plus 6x equals negative 1. Okay, so in completing the square, our first step was that we needed to get the constant to the other side of the equation. It's already there, so I'm just going to rewrite it, but this time put my blanks in. So plus blank equals negative 1 plus blank. So let's fill in the blank. How do I fill in the blank? 6 over 2 squared, which equals 3 squared, which is 9. So in the blanks is 9. Next step, we want to factor this. How does that guy factor? X plus 3 squared equals 8. Negative 1 plus 9 gives me 8. So take the square root of both sides. That gives me x plus 3 equals plus or minus, what'd you get, Eric? 2 root 2. Good. And then to solve for x, what do I do? So that gives me x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2 root 2. Can I simplify that any more than it already is? No, so that's your answer. So you can, in completing the square, you will usually get answers that look like this. Okay, one more. Example 5. X squared minus 12x plus 50. Okay, this is not a perfect square trinomial. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of two numbers that multiply to 50 and add up to negative 12. So I'm going to go to completing the square. So I need to get 50 to the other side. So that gives me x squared minus 12x plus blank equals negative 50 plus blank. How do I fill in the blank? Negative 12 over 2 squared. So that gives me negative 6 squared, which is positive 36. So in the blanks is 36. This guy factors to x minus 6 squared equals negative 14. Take the square root of both sides. So that gives me x minus 6 equals, what's the square root of negative 14? There isn't anything, but we can do plus or minus I, good, root 14. We want to at least get that negative out. And now it's easy. Add 6 to both sides. So we get x equals 6 plus or minus I root 14. How many answers is that really? It's actually 2 answers. Okay, but you can leave it like that.